Is Bill Belichick's reign as the best coach in the NFL finally over? Could Jahan Dotson win Offensive Rookie of the Year? Is the Super Bowl winner down to Buffalo versus Kansas City? I'm going to answer my thoughts on these questions and more as I go around the NFL slate so far from this first football weekend. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it. Once again, I want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast coming off the first week of football in the NFL. And I have a lot of things to talk about. I'm very excited. I'm going to go through the slate of games, what I thought about each one, some takeaways from either side. And that's kind of going to be the process today. So, first of all, you can find us on socials at Lots of Thoughts Sports on Instagram, at LOT Sports Pod on Twitter, at Lots of Thoughts Sports on Facebook, at Lots of Thoughts Sports on TikTok, and Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast on YouTube. You can access those all via our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. Access the socials, access the podcast, access the newsletter, access the YouTube videos, daily YouTube content going up on the YouTube channel. So feel free to subscribe over there. The NFL is back, and what a first weekend. It was a great first weekend. Started off by kind of a dud of a game on Thursday night, but I think one with real impacts, right? The Rams, in my opinion, kind of came off of the Super Bowl high, Super Bowl hangover, if you will. And some players didn't play as well as they could have. Allen Robinson wasn't targeted as much as I thought he would. And certainly there's some losses, including on the defense, especially where the Rams are really noticeably weaker. But I think it really showed the prowess of the Bills. I think the Bills made major upgrades in every area they needed to. They drafted the cornerback in the first round. They got Von Miller. They added to their already very good defense, improved their weapons around Josh Allen as well. I think they're a really, really good team and a really powerful offense. And I think Josh Allen's going to be really an MVP candidate as we go through the regular season. The next game I wanted to talk about was the Chiefs and the Cardinals. The Chiefs absolutely embarrassed the Cardinals. Patrick Mahomes went 30 of 39 for 360 yards and 5 touchdowns. Just video game numbers from the Chiefs. I think this says a lot more about the Chiefs than it does the Cardinals, although I don't have faith in the Cardinals overall. But this leads to my first topic. The Chiefs and the Bills, two insanely good teams, two teams that put on a show last postseason. If you'll remember, they were going back and forth to the end. A coin toss kind of decided it, gave the Chiefs the ball. They ended up scoring a touchdown in overtime, causing the overtime rules to be redone in the postseason. But these two teams are the class of the AFC and they're the class of the NFL. They have high-powered offenses, very good defenses. The Chiefs are underrated on defense, in my opinion, but both have very high-powered offenses, very incredibly accurate and, talented quarterbacks with insane arms and ability to hit all kinds of weapons on the field. Really good number one receiving options in Travis Kelce and Stephon Diggs. Good offensive lines, a decent bevy of running backs. Both teams are very fun to watch. And I thought this last year. I thought really the Super Bowl winner would come down to the Bills and the Chiefs. And obviously it didn't because the Chiefs ended up winning and then losing to Cincinnati, who lost to the Rams. But this year I'm going to double down on it. I think the Chiefs and the Bills are really going to be the two teams that are the powerhouses in the league, and whoever's going to end up facing them in the NFC is going to be losing out, or in the AFC playoffs. I think both of these teams are on a collision course, and I'm excited to see where that goes. Next game, I'm just going to work from the top down on ESPN's website to go through each one. We had the Saints and the Falcons. Marcus Mariota proved to me that he is better than I thought he was. When I saw Atlanta was trading Matt Ryan and kind of rebuilding, I said, finally, like that, it should have been done years ago. I didn't think Marcus Mariota would be their starter. I thought they would just draft someone, run with him. And I thought Desmond Ridder was not a bad draft choice to be a franchise quarterback that could develop or one that could start right away. And obviously he's not starting right away. But Mariota is not a bad guy to learn from. He's seen quite a few different offenses in Tennessee and Oakland, now in Atlanta. He has experience of being the starter, of being benched, of being brought back to being a starter. playing limited roles in offenses where he wasn't the starter, but still getting in different packages like he did with Oakland, or should I say Vegas. Um, really a good guy for Ritter to learn from, and he's doing better than I thought he was. At least one game in, but the Saints do come out on top. Jarvis Landry, I think, is an underrated pickup by the Saints. Um, and I really haven't figured out New Orleans on their overall path, right? They have a lot of win now assets, but I don't know if they have enough to really make a lot of noise. They're a good team, but they're not a great team. I think Jameis is a good starting quarterback, or at least average starting quarterback, and nothing more. I don't know their direction really, but I think they'll be an interesting team to watch. Overall, that division's kind of a cluster cuss, if you will, uh, but a fun game nonetheless, and a great comeback by the Saints. 49ers and Bears, I think this was one of the shockers from the NFL world. Trey Lance didn't look good, and the 49ers have two quarterbacks, two starting caliber quarterbacks, neither of which are very good. And that's generally not what you want. You'd rather have one that's very good and one that's awful. And they don't have that. The Bears, although they didn't look good themselves through most of the game, Justin Fields proves that he can make a throw when he needs to. And that field condition was awful. I mean, aside from just the rain and the heavy puddling that was happening on the field, I don't know if you saw this. There was a screenshot that went around social media of the lines painted on the sidelines, and they were just not straight lines. Like I don't know, what's going on with the grounds crew there, but the new Soldier Field with the new renovations, just it was a mess to play in. You had water just absolutely drenching from the upper decks down on fans. It was not a sight to be seen. But the Bears looked more competent than they had. They pulled out a win when a lot of people didn't believe in them. And the 49ers still look like they're going to be hoping that Trey Lance either improves or they're going to be looking for a quarterback come the offseason. Next up, Steelers and Bengals. Another shock. Joe Burrow threw, I believe it was 3 interceptions. I mean, just 2 interceptions. I'm sorry, but he had a fumble as well. He looked awful. And maybe that's a Super Bowl hangover as well, right? I gave the Rams that excuse. But the Steelers looked mediocre, maybe a little bit better than that, which is what I have expected of them. I think the Steelers could absolutely find a way to be in the hunt come late in the season just because they have a high floor. I think they have a low ceiling as well. I think Mitch Trubisky only takes you so far, but overall they've got a decent amount of talent on the team, especially at the offensive skill positions. I think they have a very underrated talent. And I could see them making noise down the stretch. The Bengals, on the other hand, you have to wonder. I mean, I know it's too early to say this, but in my mind, I have to wonder whether it was just kind of a miracle run for them. They made major improvements to the offensive line, but it didn't really look great today. Joe Burrow's still throwing the ball 50 plus times in a game, which is insane. And they just looked like they couldn't step on Pittsburgh's throat, which I think you need to do if you want to be that, top tier of team that competes with Buffalo and competes with Kansas City in the AFC. And I think they're just not there yet. And maybe they'll prove me wrong and be there by the end of the season, but who knows? Next up, we had the Eagles and the Lions. Boy, this was a show. The Eagles offense looked good. Jalen Hurts answered some questions. He went 18 of 32 for 243 yards. AJ Brown looked like the great pickup he was intended to be, 10 receptions for 155 yards. And the Lions didn't look as bad as I thought they would. DeAndre Swift was featured well. He had 15 carries for 144 yards and a touchdown. Jared Goff made some throws when he needed to. Overall, I think the Eagles looked good, but it's hard to tell whether the Eagles looked good because the Lions are bad or the Eagles looked good and the Lions aren't bad in comparison or at all. You know what I'm saying? So in other words, it's hard to tell if the Eagles did well for most of this game because the Eagles are more talented than the Lions, or if they're both just mediocre and that's the way it is. But the Lions put up a good fight. I think the Lions are going to be better than most teams or most people expect. I've seen a lot of media reports having the Lions at worst or second worst in the NFL. I think they have too much talent for that. And I think they're really a quarterback away from being one of these young and upcoming teams. And I know Jared Goff's going to be the starter for the entire year, but coming in next draft, if they have the option to trade up or whatever the situation is to try to get a guy like Bryce Young, I think they do it, and I think they're a decent team that could end up reaching the playoffs in the near future. Next up, we had the Patriots and the Dolphins, and this is one of the things I talked about in the intro. I don't know if it's Bill Belichick or the Patriots roster, but they just don't feel the same. And they haven't felt the same since Brady left. That year with Cam Newton was underwhelming. Last year, it felt like they were just lucking into everything. And this year, so far in this game, they haven't looked great. They don't have a lot of talent at key positions. And I think I don't know that Bill is necessarily being passed up as the best coach in the league, but I think his coaching can only take a bad roster so far. And for years, they had a bad roster that Brady, kind of pulled up from the dredges, and Belichick was able to outcoach, whoever he was facing. And I don't know if he could still do that, especially with Mac Jones at quarterback. I think Mac Jones, like the Steelers, has a low ceiling and a high floor, but that doesn't help the Patriots a lot when their talent level is pretty low overall. The Dolphins looked good in this game. Tua ended up having some decent stats, 23 of 33 for 270 yards and a touchdown. I still think he needs to prove, really his capabilities. I think he's shown that he could be a good NFL starter. I don't think he's shown he is a good NFL starter, if that makes sense. And Tyreek Hill certainly helps in that situation. He helped today, right? 8 receptions for 94 yards. That's what you brought him in for. He didn't get the score, but they have other weapons as well. Jalen Waddle, among others, that they could go to. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I need to see a little bit more from the Dolphins before I declare that Tua should be their starting quarterback and they're a contending team in the AFC. Next up, we had the Ravens and the Jets. I'm wearing my Jets shirt still. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're not, first of all, watching us on YouTube, you can search Lots of Thoughts of Sports podcasts. Will come up with full YouTube versions of the podcast and daily video content. But I'm wearing my Jets shirt still from the game today, and that was embarrassing. 24-9 was the final score, and in some ways, it felt so much closer, and in some ways, it felt so much further than 24-9. Of course, the Jets scored a late touchdown, and that was part of the reason they were able to catch up somewhat. But the offense looked horrible. The defense started out really well. They limited Lamar in the passing game and in the running game. They really held the Ravens offense in check, 10 points at the half. And then you just felt like the offense could never make that strike to get them back in the game. A couple of poor special teams plays, a bad punt, a missed field goal, and then a few deep plays from the Ravens, and the Jets were cooked. Joe Flacco threw the ball 59 times in this game. And I know the Jets are missing their starting quarterback, right? Their offense should do better when Zach Wilson comes back. But I don't love Joe Flacco starting as the backup quarterback. I like Mike White a heck of a lot better, and I liked him a heck of a lot better coming into this game. Joe Flacco just isn't mobile whatsoever. So the Jets, who already have offensive line problems, have a bigger issue because he can't escape the pocket. I hope Mike White, as a Jets fan, I hope Mike White starts next week. And I hope Zach Wilson gets back as soon as possible so we can see what this young offense actually turns into. The Ravens looked good. Lamar looks good, as always. He didn't sign his extension, which is another topic that we could get into. Offered a lot of money and turned it down. Rightfully so. I think he's deserving of more. But I'll be interested to see what happens in the offseason to see if the Ravens offer him a bigger contract. I think they should. I think he's worth more than they offered him, especially with the NFL salary cap just continually increasing significantly more than it had the previous year. But it'll be interesting to watch because I feel like the Ravens are a little bit hesitant to do so, given the history of running quarterbacks in the NFL and their injuries. I think that's the main reason they're not so inclined. But Lamar Jackson is their best option for sure, and they should get that done. Next up, we had the Jaguars and the Commanders. Two teams that I thought looked better than I expected. And maybe that's because they played one another and they're just both mediocre, like the Philly and Detroit scenario I talked about earlier. But Trevor Lawrence looked decent. Carson Wentz looked really good. He went 27 of 41 for 313 yards and 4 touchdowns. Um, the weapons on Jacksonville proved to be worthy of, this kind of off-season hype. And it was a close game, and there were some throws that needed to be made that weren't, and some throws that needed to be made that were. Um, Especially the late interception that Trevor Lawrence had. But I think the Jaguars' future can be said to be bright. I don't know that it necessarily will be, but I think there's a distinct possibility that it may be. And I think Washington's not as bad of a team as people think. I think I predicted at the beginning of the season, not on this platform, but on social media, that they would make the playoffs as a wild card team. And I'll still stand by that. I think they're good enough to do that. They might even make it as a division winner, depending on how good the Eagles are, given the fact that the Cowboys situation is not great, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think they have more talent, especially with Jahan Dotson. He looked great today. 2 touchdowns, really lit up the scene. For in terms of rookie wide receivers, he was one of the least talked about, drafted in the first round, right? You had Drake London going to Atlanta. You had Garrett Wilson going to the Jets. You had Chris Olave going to the Saints. You had Jamison Williams going to the Lions. Jahan Dotson kind of slid under the radar, and a lot of people didn't like the draft pick. They felt it was reaching for that player, especially when Washington traded back out of the pick that the Saints used to take Olave. But he looked good. He looked very good. And if he could prove to be a valuable weapon, that trade was a big win for them. And I was being a bit hyperbolic in the introduction about him maybe winning the offensive rookie of the year, but you never know. And there's been no one else so far that's really taken reign of that. So we'll see. But the Commanders will be an interesting team to watch for sure. Next up, the Browns and the Panthers. This feels, hear me out. This feels a lot like an NBA game where I think the NBA does exceptionally well in comparison to the other sports at drumming up drama, right? They bring in all these stars that are, they get all the news out there that, for example, Kevin Durant and James Harden aren't getting along because of Kyrie Irving's vaccination status, or LeBron James is secretly asking for Russell Westbrook to get out, or, you get the idea. The NBA does a great job of kind of stirring that up and making players feel more, making fans feel there's more emotion tied to players playing one another than there really is. And the Panthers and the Browns felt like that. It felt like Baker Mayfield was emotionally charged up and wanted that win and didn't get it, right? Game-winning field goal for the Browns to end the game 26-24. Baker Mayfield did end up 16-27 for 235 yards and a touchdown. But Nick Chubb was the star, of course, 22 carries for 141 yards. Jacoby Brissett did what they needed him to do. Robbie Anderson looked really good for someone who hasn't had consistent quarterback play for years, maybe his whole career. He had Sam Darnold in New York, and then goes to Carolina, plays with mediocre quarterbacks, then gets Sam Darnold again, pushed back on him. Now he's got a quarterback, Baker Mayfield, I don't love, but he's a starting NFL quarterback. And that might be enough for Robbie Anderson to have another, breakout season and really return to the fold as a wide receiver one. I think the Panthers aren't a good team overall, but that'll be fun to watch. And I think the Browns are a good team when they have a competent quarterback. And we'll see what Deshaun Watson is for them when he comes back. But Jacoby Brissett should be enough to keep them in, kind of around contention, in the hunt, if you will, until Deshaun Watson does come back, and then we'll see what this team could really be like and if he was worth the big contract. But they're going to be an interesting team to watch in that perspective. Next up, we had the Colts and the Texans tying at 20. And that sums up what happened in this game. I really didn't like watching any of it. Matt Ryan ended up compiling a lot of stats, 32 of 50 for 352 yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor, boy, he is exceptional. 31 carries for 161 yards and a touchdown. And Michael Pittman ended up with 9 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown. Davis Mills looked pretty good in this game, honestly, for someone who is the 5th most talked about quarterback in his class, behind Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Fields. Davis Mills looks like he belongs in that conversation. Like, maybe he could be a franchise quarterback. And the Colts feel underwhelming. I didn't believe in them a lot going into the season. I think this is still the worst division in the NFL overall, but they just never inspire confidence in me. Maybe it's just the way that Frank Reich coaches, but I don't know. If I was a Colts fan, I would not be excited about anything that's happened in Indianapolis over the past few years, and this year looks no different. Speaking of excitement, next up we have the Giants and the Titans. And you could say the exact opposite about the New York Giants. This was one of the biggest wins for them in a long time. It's the first time they have a winning season, or they're above 500, should I say, since 2016. The only player still on the roster since that point is Sterling Shepard, and he was a rookie. It's been a long time since the Giants have had this much faith in who's running their organization. Joe Shane has made decent personnel decisions, but Brian Dable is a coach, is a competent, talented NFL head coach. You can tell that already. And maybe I'll eat my words later on, but the way he gets guys going on the sideline, the way he gets the best out of his players, and you've only seen this through one game, you can already tell the culture shift. You can already tell the way players are, have his back. And it's such a drastic difference when you see him going for two late in that game, right? Putting his balls on the table and making the risky call that he needs. And he doesn't care about the criticism, right? He said in his press conference, that he can't worry about the criticism that happens if he doesn't call a successful play. He's just got to call what he thinks is best. And you compare that going for two with what happened at the end of last year, which I think cost Joe Judge's job. The Giants going for back-to-back quarterback sneaks on their own 7-yard line or whatever it was. I think Joe Judge would still be around if he didn't do that. I think that was kind of the nail in the coffin, but it's such a drastic difference between the two, cultures and the two organizational regimes. I think the Giants are in really good hands. I think Saquon Barkley looked the best he's looked in years. He ended up with 18 carries for 164 yards and a touchdown. You still don't know if Daniel Jones is the answer, and I don't know that you'll know it by the end of the year, which means he isn't the answer, right? If he hasn't proven that he is the answer at quarterback by the end of the year, that means he isn't. And that means you could reassess what's going on in the following season. But given that we may not know if Daniel Jones is the quarterback or not, this is the best case scenario today that could have come out of the Giants game. They looked really good. They got the win. Overall, Giants fans should be looking up. And the Titans, it's a rough loss. The Giants were coming in as a team that didn't have a lot of expectations, and you got outclassed and outcoached. Ryan Tannehill continues to be a quarterback I don't have a lot of faith in. He didn't have a bad game today, 20 of 33 for 266 and 2 touchdowns. But he was just uninspiring. The whole offense as a whole was uninspiring. The defense really got worn out toward the end of the game. Like I talked about with the Colts and the Texans, I don't have a lot of faith in any team from the AFC South. And it really sucks because other divisions are so talented, including the AFC West, right? But this is not one of them. Speaking of divisionals, we have next up the Packers and the Vikings. Kind of a shocking performance from Minnesota. Kirk Cousins looked good. Dalvin Cook looked good, but who looked really good was Justin Jefferson. He ended up with 9 receptions for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns. He might be the best receiver in the NFL. He's right up there with Cooper Kupp. It's very close, and he's significantly younger. He runs crisp routes. He gets separation. He's incredible to watch, and even a quarterback like Kirk Cousins makes him look that good. You could imagine what would happen if he had an elite quarterback behind him throwing in the ball. But the Vikings look good. They really stymied Aaron Rodgers. They really showed that his weapons, really weren't enough without Devontae Adams there. I think there's real question marks in Green Bay, but we said the same thing at this point last year. They kind of got shocked early on. Green Bay did. I forgot who beat them, but we'll see as time goes on. But the Vikings look good, and this should be an encouraging sign that the Vikings could be a playoff team come the end of this year. Next up, the Raiders and the Chargers. The Chargers held off the Raiders 24-19. I think these are 2 playoff teams in my mind. 2 wild card teams. I think the Chiefs win this division because I think they're, kind of like I mentioned, the class of the NFL. But I think the Raiders and Chargers are both underrated teams. Derek Carr's a very good quarterback. The addition of Devontae Adams was a great one. He ended up with 10 receptions for 141 yards and a touchdown. They have great receivers around him. Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, Josh Jacobs is good both in the running game and the passing game. I don't think the Raiders really showed out like they could have today, and the Chargers, pass rush looked pretty good. Uh, but they're a good team, and I'm not afraid that they're going to fall off toward the middle of this season. I don't have, everlasting faith in their new head coach, Josh McDaniels, but I think he's a competent enough coach to where he can manage them to a playoff spot with the amount of talent they have. And the Chargers, I mean, you could have expected more from them. I think a lot of people in media think that the Chargers are really going to be one of those upper echelon teams like the Chiefs, like the Bills. I don't believe that. I think they're a step down from that, a significant step down from that. But I think they're still a very good team, and I think they're going to be a solid playoff team. They looked good overall. Justin Herbert is an upper echelon quarterback, in my opinion. Um, Really, I think there's maybe 5 quarterbacks better than him in the NFL, and he's got a whole bunch of upside going into the rest of this year. I think if you're a Chargers fan, you're very happy about what happened today, but you're very encouraged about what can come in the future. And if you're a Raiders fan, I don't think you could be too disappointed. The last game, the Buccaneers and the Cowboys, 19-3. The Buccaneers took the win on Sunday Night Football. Tom Brady, in his age 72 season, went 18-27 for 212 yards and a touchdown. Not really impressive stats. But the Cowboys looked overmatched, and now Dak Prescott's hurt. He's supposed to have surgery on his hand, according to Jerry Jones, and he'll be out for probably at least a month, which I just like to say. I don't love that Jerry Jones is the one making that announcement. If I'm a Cowboys fan, my least favorite part of the team is Jerry Jones. He's uninspiring as owner. He's uninspiring as a GM. He's uninspiring as a kind of a face of the franchise, which I don't know any other owner in sports that's really in the face of the franchise. Even the most pronounced owners in sports, like Mark Cuban, have stars that overpower them. And the Cowboys don't have, they have stars. Well, I don't mean the star on their logo or on the field. I'm talking about superstars. They have very good players in Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott, and CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, if you want to call him that. But the fact that Jerry Jones is the guy who's breaking this news and not their head coach, I think is more of a sign than anything. And I just don't believe in Mike McCarthy going forward as a whole. I think the Cowboys' chances to win the division were fairly good just because I don't believe in a lot of the teams in that division. But they significantly got shot in the foot with Dak Prescott's injury, and we'll see how quickly he comes back and how well they can hold up in the meantime. The Buccaneers look good. They didn't look exceptional, but Brady hasn't had a lot of time in the preseason and training camp to really gel with his teammates, a lot of which he didn't think he was going to be playing with. So, we'll see what comes of the Buccaneers as time goes on. I still think they could be a dangerous team in the NFC playoffs, but they looked good enough to win this game, and that's what's important. Overall, a fun slate of games. I'm excited for Broncos and Seahawks, the Russell Wilson revenge game, the Drew Lock revenge game, even though Drew Lock's going to be sitting on the bench. I'm excited to see Geno Smith, though, as a Jets fan. I think he's finally getting the opportunity to start, and he wasn't. I think, honestly, he was not given the best fair shake in New York. I thought he was in for a decent year before Ike and Kapali really sucker punched him, quite literally, and cost him that season. So I'm excited to see what he does with the good host of weapons around him that they seem to not want to trade. But I'm also excited to see what Russell Wilson looks like in Denver, to see whether it was the Seahawks that held them back or whether he was the limiting factor. Because I have a feeling it's a little bit more of the latter than most people think. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. This has been a week 1 NFL roundup here Sunday night after Sunday Night Football, going through all the games. I really appreciate it if you got into this far in the video or in the podcast. If you want to follow us on socials, we're at Lots of Thoughts Sports on Instagram and on TikTok. You can find us Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast, on Facebook and on YouTube. And we're also at LOT Sports Pod on Twitter. We post daily YouTube video content on our YouTube page, so feel free to drop a subscription over there. You can also find us on our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysite.com. There you can access the Instagram, the TikTok, the Twitter, the Facebook, the YouTube, the podcast, and the newsletter, all from that one site. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this episode of Lots of Thoughts, and have a wonderful rest of your day.